Hello, welcome to the 14th episode of our Shastrartha series. Today's discussion is on securitization of stressed assets, which is the SOSTRA framework. Recently, draft guidelines have been issued by the RBI. 4 draft guidelines were issued, one of which was securitization of stressed assets. Today, we'll be discussing the nuances connected with the draft guidelines, what RBI has intended to issue in terms of who can be the originator, what type of assets can be securitized under this framework, who all can be the investors, and the impact on the existing framework that is already there. We have our ARCs who do a similar kind of setup. We have with us Vinod sir, who will be guiding us through the entire regulations that the RBI has issued. And in case we have any questions, please feel free to drop down in the comment section of this video. So, sir, starting with the securitization of stressed asset framework, firstly, let us understand there were existing guidelines on securitization of standard assets already in place. What is the need for having a specific guidelines for stressed assets? Because stressed assets as such also were transferred under the DLE directions, and we were transferring stress loans to ARCs as well. Now, NPA securitization was something that was not there in place. So, is it specifically just for NPA, and what is the intent of having this guidelines in place?
Right. So, Anita, partly the answer lies in the question itself. When you mentioned that currently we have a securitization framework for standard assets. When it comes to stress assets, particularly non-performing loans, we don't have a securitization framework. We, of course, can do a bilateral transfer in terms of the TLE directions, transfer it to another NBFC, transfer it maybe to a bank, or transfer it to more commonly ARCs. But that's a bilateral transfer process. Securitization, on the other hand, is a process for converting loans into securities where the securities presumably go to capital market. So there wasn't a linkage between the asset market and the financial markets in terms of capital markets. There wasn't a linkage in the past dealing with non-performing loans. ARCs could do it. ARCs could probably issue security receipts, but ARCs as an institution, as an instrumentality, have a different role, which is something that we're going to discuss as we speak later. But the question basically is that for non-performing loans, a non-performing loan, the moment we talk about an NPL, we talk about a large corporate loan which is probably not paying for years and years. We talk about the so-called dirty dozen. Let's not visualize those loans only as the loans in question. Lots and lots of non-performing loans today have piled up on the balance sheets of banks and financial institutions, which are basically retail loans. Retail loan pools where the loan has earned the tag of being an NPA. And while it's an NPA, it doesn't mean the cash flows are not coming. Cash flows are coming on a pool basis regularly. Loans have, however, still got the tag of an NPA because of the November 2020 circular. 12th November, right?
12th November.
Which says that once the loan becomes an NPA, unless the borrower clears the entire outstanding, he will remain an NPA. Unfortunately, that's what happens once an NPA remains an NPA, because you would hardly be able to find enough money to clear all your, wash out all your past dues, and therefore the NPA tag remains for months and months altogether. Now, those loans which are therefore tagged NPA, though the borrower is paying month on month, and therefore there's a cash flow on a pool basis coming, collection efficiency might be lower, but cash flow is coming every month. There wasn't any mechanism to convert those pools of loans into securities, because as you mentioned, the so-called SSA framework completely excluded the non-performing loans. I could go up to 89 DPD, but the moment the loan becomes 90 DPD, I couldn't add it as a part of a securitization pool at all. Is this a situation elsewhere in the world? Answer is very clearly no. Elsewhere in the world, partly when you create a securitization transaction, no regulation tells you that you cannot add non-performing loans. It's basically a question of what the investors need. You could add NPLs as well. In addition, there are also transactions where it's a pool of NPLs only, and so much so that in many countries, governments even try to encourage to allow a cleanup of the balance sheet of the bank. Government actually allows NPL securitizations to happen. So a lot of these transactions have been happening, particularly in Europe, a lot of it in US as well. But in India, we lacked the framework in the past. So it's good that the RBI is something which is long due, because the last draft came in early 2023. and therefore the market was strongly needing this alternative option. So good that the RBI has it, Anita.
Right. So if we want to just understand the background and the development, as you mentioned that there was a discussion paper that was issued in 2023 and thereafter RBI announced under the statement on development and regulatory policies that it will be coming out on the same day, which is April 9th, which was the Navkar Divas as well. So four new guidelines were issued, one of which was these guidelines. Let us understand some of the key features of this, sir. Firstly, who can be the originator under the SOSTRA guidelines?
Right. So I think very simple answer, only regulated lenders, be it banks, be it NBFCs, be it AIFIs, regulated lenders can be originators. That's a simple, short answer. Banks, NBFCs, AIFIs, HFCs, they can sell their non-performing loans. It may partly consist of stressed, but not non-performing to an extent of not more than 10%. You can add stressed, that would mean zero DPD loan. Answer is clearly no. 1 to 89 DPD to the extent of 10%, and the rest 90% will have to be NPLs. That's what the regulation permits. But ask me practically, will there be much of sense in adding 1 to 89 DPDs? I don't think it would actually. Is it a sweetener? Is it going to make the deal any better for the buyer? I really don't think so. 10% is too small to be even a sugar coating value to the investor. So primarily it would be deal of a pool of NPLs. What kind of NPLs? Is it like very, very long dated NPLs with 365 days past due, etc.? Once again, I don't think practically investors would not find a lot of attraction to buy NPLs which are sticky for a long time. Recent NPLs turned into NPL, let's say about 3 months, 4 months back. That would mean 90 DPD onwards, right? Up to maybe 6 months DPD probably would be a good pool for investors to buy, particularly loans which are giving regular cash flows, even though they've not been able to clear the tag of being an NPL. So that's the kind of transaction that one would envisage would happen, but it's an alternative mechanism to sell to ARCs. If you ask me why would ARC not be able to do the same thing, ARCs have a different role. ARCs are a resolution agent. Their role basically is to use legal powers under SARFAESI Act, powers under IBC, powers under the various recovery laws to extract money from a delinquent borrower. Here, when it comes to retail loans, number one, SARFAESI is not applicable. Most of the loans are anyway unsecured, or the loan size may not be sufficient to have SARFAESI powers. Number two, we don't need IBC because you're talking about personal loans. So while legal powers are not relevant here, do ARCs really have much of a role? Can the normal recovery team of the NBFC or the banker in question, can they not continue to recover as they were recovering in the past? And while we still continue to maintain the same recovery mechanism, also do a balance sheet cleanup in the meantime without doing any shake-up of our relation with the borrower. Let the borrower relation still exactly remain the same. No borrower notification maybe, therefore just a balance sheet cleanup. That's the idea. So that's the idea of creating liquidity as also balance sheet cleanup, Anita.
Right. So let us now understand that you mentioned that originator could be regulated entities and the kind of assets, the focus is on non-performing assets. There is also concept of reperforming assets. You mentioned that non-performing will form the majority of NPL and 10% can be stressed loans. What is the concept of reperforming assets and where will they fall?
Right. So reperforming might technically also mean those loans which had NPL status earlier but now become performing, upgraded to standard because the borrower has brought down the DPD to zero. That is, to my mind, in retail loans quite less likely to happen. So mostly what I mean by the so-called reperforming loans in the context of SOSTRA would be those loans which are technically NPL but are paying cash flow month on month. The borrower is probably 3 months lagging. He probably might become 4 months lagging, but it then continues paying month on month, not like is not paying anything at all. He's not been able to, like I mentioned, remove the tag because it's not been able to clear the backlog. That's quite hard for a borrower to be able to manage money, to clean his sins in the past, but he continues paying. और पाप नहीं कर रहा, बट पहले वाला पाप धोना उसके लिए, आपकी लैंग्वेज बोलूं, निर्जरा करना पॉसिबल नहीं है, वो निर्जरा उसके लिए बड़ा मुश्किल हो जाता है.
Right. So
नवकार लैंग्वेज में बोल रहा हूँ.
So securitization, when we say securitization of stress loan, securitization with the concept of tranching, the pool diversification, these are important things. because any securitization transaction without a diversification of the pool or without tranching, these things cannot be done. We'll come to one by one credit enhancement and other things. Firstly, please guide us or explain how are we ensuring the diversification of a pool of already non-performing assets in this case.
So quick points first. Number one, diversification is necessary for any tranching. And tranching is necessary part of securitization. That's, I think, where we start. Securitization by definition involves tranches.
Right.
Tranching by definition would necessitate diversification. Now, what's the measure of diversification? The RBI has brought a mathematical formula called Herfindahl index, HI, Herfindahl index. That's the RBI parameter, Herfindahl index, which basically means we cannot have a single asset securitization. We cannot have a single asset, a single NPL, for example, getting securitized. That's not possible.
In contrast to SSA.
In contrast to S, which allows single asset securitizations to happen. So here I would need at least 4. And given the differential sizes of the loans, I might actually need more than 4. Right. So in case of retail loans, I don't have an issue at all. In case of corporate loans, technically I would probably satisfy the 0.3 HI test even with, let's say, 4 or 5 loans. But is that the way tranching can work? I would not, normally wouldn't think so, because what we need for tranching is diversification. What we need for diversification is granularity and uncorrelated loan portfolios. So practically, I would still think that mostly SOSTRA would remain relevant for retail loans, because when it comes to corporate loans, we'll still need some resolution to work. We'll still need some concerted, focused recovery effort, where probably ARC would still be better than a pure SPV coming as an instrumentality. Anita?
Since you mentioned about resolution, there is also a concept of resolution manager
Right.
that is there under the SOSTRA guidelines. So are you still expecting ARCs to only act as resolution manager in this case also, or can the originator also act as the resolution manager? Can there be a service provider who is providing this? Who all can be resolution manager, and what is the role that the resolution manager will play in this entire transaction?
So let's first understand what is the extent of resolution we need, what kind of resolution we need, and who provides the resolution services. So depending on the type of NPL, there are NPLs where significant resolution effort is required. A sticky corporate loan backed by, let's say, commercial real estate, I have to do SARFAESI action to be able to grab the real estate, sell it down, liquidate the real estate, or maybe take that into liquidation process, resolution process, IBC. Try and extract money using the paraphernalia of SARFAESI, come IBC or SARFAESI or IBC. That's where real resolution effort is required. On the contrary, think of personal loans. Now, like I mentioned earlier, we don't have SARFAESI, IBC, either of these. So, what is needed there? What is needed is constant recovery effort, which the collection guys were already doing. So, if all that was needed was collection effort, and I wouldn't say the loans are bad because of lack of collection. Collection teams were still working, but well, like it or not, but loans anyway go bad. So if loans have gone bad, the borrower doesn't need any significant resolution effort. First, we may not need resolution because that's a pure investment play. We don't have a resolution play or a mix of resolution and investment play. All we're looking at pure investment play, because there is a pool of so-called non-performing loans. It's giving cash flows month on month. There's an investor or investors who are willing to buy, of course, at a higher discounting rate, looking at a higher yield, that pool of non-performing loans. And that's something which is, I would say, largely an investment play, where SOSTRA without resolution may still work. So resolution is not mandatory, resolution is optional. Who can be resolution manager? The originator himself could be one, if provided he's keeping a MRR of at least 5%, he could be the one, which is actually saying that my own collection machinery, as was working earlier, will continue to work. Or I can get another so-called resolution manager, which could probably be another NBFC, could be a bank, or maybe an ARC. So question once again, what is it that we would gain by bringing an ARC as resolution manager? Would ARC's presence in the scenario, would it give any SARFAESI powers? If the loans in question originally did not have SARFAESI, I don't think bringing ARC into picture as a resolution manager will give us SARFAESI access. SARFAESI wasn't there, SARFAESI wouldn't be there. SARFAESI can't be introduced merely by bringing the ARC as the resolution manager. ARC is anyway not the assignee here, simply resolution manager. So ARC's role once again would be that of a concerted, focused recovery effort, which probably could be handled by any other resolution manager as well. So I'm not necessarily expecting, particularly for a pool of retail loans, the real necessity of the role of an ARC, but that's something which is the market's own choice. If the market thinks ARCs can contribute, can increase the collection efficiency, so be it, no issue.
Right.
Anita?
Who can be the investors in
Once
these?
again, very simple question. Anyone who has got 1 crore rupees to invest in the securitization notes, 1 crore, where do we get it from? That's the minimum ticket size of an investment under the SSA direction. So that 1 crore remains applicable here as well. Someone has got 1 crore to put in to buy the securitization notes. Could be anyone, could be there for invest. It could be HNIs, could be individuals, could be NBFCs, could be family offices, could be FPIs. Remember, FPIs also. And remember that foreign portfolio investors have a lot of interest in NPL market. They have a lot of interest in retail loans in the country anyway. And they have significant interest in NPA transactions as well. So subject to the 50% limit as applicable in case of bond transactions, FPIs may also be investing in SOSTRA transactions too. So anyone who is eligible to be an investor in the bond market or securitization market can be investor under SOSTRA framework too.
Okay. So you were also talking about the concept of MRR, MHP and MRR. These are terms we usually associate with securitization. Under this framework, SOSTRA framework, is there an MHP requirement? Is there an MRR requirement?
So here, MHP not applicable. MHP not applicable. There's no minimum holding period not required. Why is not required? Quite simple. The loans have already become NPA. Loans become NPA only after 3 months of being on my books. The loans have been on my books anyway. I don't think the loan became NPA from the very first day.
Right.
So the loans have been seasoned to become NPA. Therefore, MHP has no relevance here. Therefore, MHP is not required. MRR is once again optional. I may or may not, as an originator, I may or may not have an MRR. Practically, however, I don't expect a transaction to happen without a first loss support from the originator, because basic rule of economics is that whatever I'm not able to sell, I didn't find a buyer, and therefore what I couldn't sell remains with me because I couldn't find a buyer anyway. So what couldn't be sold anyway has to stay back with me, and that is the concept of MRR. So practically, I do not expect transactions to happen without at least a significant, I wouldn't even think of anything less than 10% MRR. So MRR will have to be there practically. Max, of course, is still 20%. The RBI's viewpoint is that there is a 20% cap on the extent of exposure that the originator can have. But that's how MRR, MHP. Technically not required. Practically MRR will be there. MHP anyway doesn't have a place.
Since you mentioned this is the maximum limit, now the originator is also investing. So originator is also taking some kind of an exposure. What is necessary for the originator? This entire exercise is a cleanup exercise. I'm wanting to get rid of the NPS from my book.
Right.
Can I still achieve derecognition in this case? If derecognition, because unless and until derecognition is achieved, I'll not be able to off balance sheet these loans. And they will still form a part of my portfolio. So is there a possibility that off balance sheet can be achieved? One, and second, how do we maybe structure the transaction to ensure that that is satisfied?
So that's a very important point, and you do understand that this is a sort of a detox exercise. I have to detoxify my balance sheet. I have to detox my balance sheet. So therefore, the clear objective is that I should be able to remove the loans from my balance sheet. If I'm not able to remove the loans, that the very purpose, one of the very important purposes of this entire SOSTRA exercise gets frustrated. I would rather than sell the loans to ARCs, but there it's no questions asked. No auditor is asking me question why the loans which I'm selling to ARCs in bilateral transactions should not go off the books. No matter what kind of retention might be there, but auditors don't question that. When it comes to securitization transactions, somehow the taboo, the inertia seems to be, oh, it's PTC, therefore no off balance sheet. So let's first understand. Are we saying that the moment it's securitization, it cannot be off the books, it cannot be off balance sheet? This is a misnotion. Accounting standards talk about conditions of derecognition. Accounting standards have not said no matter what you cannot achieve derecognition. Accounting standards say if you've done a transfer of risks and rewards. Risk, and that's a keyword, risk. If you've done a transfer of risk and rewards, if you've done a transfer of risk and rewards, you can achieve derecognition. The question basically is, am I doing transfer of risk and rewards? There are two words here, risk and rewards. Am I retaining risk? To the extent I have MRR, I'm surely having risk.
Yes.
And the MRR is thick enough because the very fact that I have to make the senior tranches sellable to someone would necessitate that my risk retention is significant to give a sufficient degree of protection. Right. Therefore, I am retaining risk, which is very clear. The answer to risk retention is very surely yes. Am I retaining the reward? What does reward mean? Reward meaning, if I expected a collection efficiency of 60%, but I'm actually able to attain 67, the remaining 7%, would it flow back to me, or does it anyway wholly or partly shared with investors? So if you're able to create a structure where the residual money after the expected collections is distributed, I'm not saying entirely should go to investors, that would then frustrate the very motive. But if there's a structure which allows excess spread, the concept of EIS or excess spread that happens in case of SSA transactions will be different. Right. Because those transactions give regular interest. These transactions are already NPAs. Yes. Therefore, anything which is coming is actually principal. Technically, whatever comes from an NPA is first taken towards, I mean, there's no interest rate, so it's complete recovery of principal only. But we would still be able to find what is the excess spread, meaning over and above what we expected to collect. And that excess spread, if it's allowed to flow at least significantly to investors, I would at least expect that transaction structures may be created, may be crafted. It's a question of crafting. It's a question of crafting and then fighting with our
convincing our auditors.
फाइट करना, कन्विंस करने के लिए फाइट नहीं करना पड़े, ऐसा मैं नहीं समझता. तो फाइटिंग तो वहाँ रिक्वायर्ड होगा. Fighting without fighting to the extent of, let's say, even fidgeting with our auditors to try and convince them that this is a case where you have not been allowing the recognition in the past, but here please do have a change of view, because here the whole purpose is to achieve off balance sheet. To my mind, to answer your question, yes, it's possible for a properly crafted transaction to achieve the recognition, but will the books of the originator be completely clean? Because that would bring us the next question: what happens to the impact in the books of investor? Right. The originator is also holding the MRR piece to that extent, is the investor as well. So will his books be completely, मैंने क्या वो एकदम उसकी बुक से पूरा उसका पूरा जो सुगंध है या पूरा दुर्गंध पूरा चला जाएगा? आंसर ऐसा नहीं, पूरा दुर्गंध नहीं जाएगा, थोड़ा दुर्गंध फिर भी रहेगा. कैसे रहेगा? Because on my retained piece, I would still be create a provision. The provisioning requirement, now on the face of it, if you read through the provisioning requirement, अरे कितना mathematical computation, but इसको समझिए बहुत easy काम है. On a graded basis, 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. Provisioning goes from 20% first year, 40% next year, 60, 80, 100. That means at the end of 5 years, we write off everything. That's the provisioning requirement. This provisioning is, however, distributed between the two tranches. RB has taken example of 3, but I think practically 2 ही रहेंगे. I'm talking about 2, senior versus junior. आपको उसका रिस्क वेट देखना. रिस्क वेट कहां से आएगा? रिस्क वेट आएगा रेटिंग से. सीनियर ट्रांच रेटेड है, जूनियर ट्रांच रेटेड नहीं है. सीनियर ट्रांच की रेटिंग कहां तक हो सकती है? In a typical SSA transaction, we go to AAA. Right. But here, I don't think we'll be able to reach AAA. Let's assume that we reach BBB. BBB senior most risk weight as per the risk weight table is probably 105%. The risk weight for unrated tranche is 1250%. So 105 versus 1250 multiplied by the respective exposures, that's what gives us the risk weighted asset. In proportion to the risk weighted assets on the outstanding amount, that would mean minus whatever has been recovered and distributed. Outstanding amount पे on the risk weights that we just computed, उस basis पे provision आएगा. To make things simple for our audience, the larger, very very large chunk of the provision will still get attributed to the junior piece held by the originator. The senior piece held by the investor will get a very little provision, which I think is still okay because you are holding after all investment. And ये भी समझ के चलो ना कि वो जो investor, senior investor है कौन? If the senior investor, for example, a mutual fund, or say an AF, or say an HNI, or say an individual, or say another not unregulated entity by RB regulated entity नहीं है, तो provisioning requirement apply नहीं करती. उस केस में you can do your FVTPL as per accounting standards. If at all accounting standards apply, you can do FVTPL as per accounting standards. So provision as such would be applicable only if the investor happens to be an RBI regulated lending entity to whom provisioning requirements apply. In that case, the provisioning rule applies. Anita?
Right. So, sir, moving ahead, also tax was an important
That's
factor to
another
us
very-
because
very
under
important.
the SSA regulations, we had this section which was 115
115
TCA.
बराबर.
तो वहां पे टैक्स ट्रांसपेरेंसी था. It was a pass through kind of a tax support that was provided to the SPV. यहाँ पे will the SPV who is securitizing the stressed assets, who is buying the stressed assets from the originator, will the same treatment be available for the SPV?
So if you read the language of 115 TCA, it refers to RBI directions on securitization of standard assets. इसका मतलब 115 TCA में as such there's reference to RBI securitization of standard assets. ये standard है नहीं.
Right.
We're talking about NPL here. So currently the text of 115 TCA does not directly refer to standard asset securitization. But then there is another thing which is listed transactions under SEBI's SDI regulation. So I can take it for listing. If I take it for listing, then the exemption anyway comes in. Somebody might even argue that there is also a reference to transactions done under SURFACE Act. This is of course not done under SURFACE Act. So I wouldn't want to take the risk of a tax officer questioning this transaction because you're actually not doing it under SURFACE Act. So I would say, if you, until the Income Tax Act admits by clear, extension of 115 TCA, a transaction of non-performing loans as well, I would rather suggest let's go for listing to avoid any misgiving, avoid any chance of the tax officer not